Hello, welcome everybody. It is so nice to see all of you. I'm excited to be joined by Amanda Banks, Joanna Studio, and Jen Whitmer. We're going to dive into leadership bravery. And it was interesting. We were having some conversation before we got started, and we all have lots of examples and some different things we're going to share with you to help you with those conversations. But welcome to today's conversation. And I wanted to do some introductions as well. So Amanda Banks is an entrepreneur, TEDx speaker, media show host, consultant, and was also a former competitive athlete. And her company is Create and Innovate Solutions, and they help individuals and companies build authentic influence through platforms, events, and relationships. She holds a bachelor's degree in business, healthcare management, and she serves on several boards and councils, as well as mentors a very innovative group at Vanderbilt called Wondery. So welcome, Amanda. We're really excited to have your input on this conversation.
Excited to be here.
Joanna and I have been together for many years, and I'm excited to have her join us today. So she's originally from Ecuador and immigrated to the U.S. in 1999. She served in the U.S. Army until 2003. Actually, the goal was for her to learn English. So she joined the Army to learn English and served, reaching the level of sergeant, and also was deployed to Iraq during Operation Iraqi Freedom. She holds a double bachelor's degree in international business and marketing and has 17 years of industry experience. Joanna has stepped into a new role, and she is the Hispanic community segment leader for a $50 billion regional bank called Bank of Oklahoma, and they're under BOK Financial. So welcome, Joanna, and thank you for your service too. It's good to see you.
Thank you, Michelle. Great to see you. Thank you for having me.
And Jen Whitmer, self-proclaimed, I love this. This is Jen, totally. Self-proclaimed recovering conflict avoider, has 20 plus years experience leading groups from classrooms and schools to volunteer groups, and the hardest of all, herself. She is an international speaker, consultant, and joy bringer. She holds graduate certificates in music education, theology, and leadership, along with a Master of Arts in Communication and Culture. She has extended training in conflict resolution and is certified as an Enneagram coach. Lots of application with what we're doing as we're trying to learn about each other. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm Michelle Dahl. We started the Female Roundtable 3 years ago, and we're in 15 countries today. And really the goal of this community is to bring more information and support for women in the workplace. And I was in the corporate space for 25 years. I now only work with women, primarily in the banking space around performance and career progression. So I'm excited to be with all of you today and ready to get into this conversation. So welcome. I would also note that we can see comments live. So if there's any questions that you have that we do not get to, please jump in and make those comments. We'll do our best to circle back to those questions. But I really wanted to get into this, and maybe we start first with how you actually define leadership bravery, kind of what the context is for you. Johanna, can we go with you first?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I think about bravery, there's so many things that come to mind, but I think for me, it's as simple as standing up for what's right and using your voice to help those who potentially have not found their voice or feel like they don't have one. But to do that, you as a leader have to show up regardless of who's watching.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. We're going to really dive into that around leadership and how to show up. Jen?
Yeah. So one of my core values is valor. And valor is so similar to bravery. I see them as slightly different, but that for me, valor is the honor, the dignity, and the bravery in the face of uncertainty. And leaders are often out front. We are, as leaders, dealing with the unknown often because by definition, people are kind of coming with us and we're leading along with them. And so when we're in that space where we have to make choices, when we don't always have all the answers, and rarely do we ever have all of the answers. I think that is one aspect of leadership bravery. And I think for women in particular, and in our current corporate cultural environment, it's starting to shift where the vulnerability that bravery requires doesn't need to be covered up. And I think that that's a really powerful shift that's happening. But even demonstrating that vulnerability is a choice of bravery. So I think those are all components of bravery as it relates to being a leader.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Great ad. Amanda?
So I've been thinking a lot about this, and I think leadership is one of those words that means something different to everybody, right? So I think it's really important as an individual, especially a leader, to think about what that term means. So I've been thinking a lot about this. I actually wrote down a definition so I could be very clear on this. But my definition of leadership is the ability to guide, inspire, and positively influence others toward achieving common goals and objectives, all while staying in alignment with your mission, values, and integrity. And so when I think about bravery, I think about the ability to just take one step forward, overcoming fear and sometimes adversity. But I think leadership is the core to all of that, and knowing what leadership means to you as a leader is absolutely critical. So that's just what it means to me. But I hope that, the audience takes back, do some digging in what leadership means to yourself and how that plays into your concepts of leadership and bravery.
And I 100% agree. So what each of you were talking about, I think you also have to have clarity, right? There's got to be a lot of clarity to be able to guide and inspire people. And you do have to have alignment, but there is a significant degree of vulnerability because, Jen, I think you talked about you don't have all of the answers, and you have to be able to work through a decision fairly quickly. And sometimes it's not even a popular one, but it's one that maybe needs to be made. And it really creates some, I'm going to call them issues, risks, or so forth for women, so to speak, because women already, we don't speak up enough in meetings. We don't put our voice in the room. We're not a dissenting opinion very often. And I wanted to get maybe some feedback in context of, in our leadership journeys today, what do you feel like are some of the biggest challenges for women that they face with this, specifically around how to show up, how to be braver in their decisions, in their conversations, in their thought processes? How would we approach that? Jen, can we start with you?
Sure. Well, I think one of the things that's really important when we're talking specifically to and for women leaders is to name the reality that the great qualities of leadership that show up in women are sometimes seen as negative. And if they were in a man, they would be praised. And I think just naming that is important because you're not crazy that happens to you. When you are direct, when you show up and say things that nobody else wants to say, or you ask a question that people are like, "Ooh, I didn't know," they get a little nervous, and people start to attack or negatively associate that. You're not crazy when that happens. I think that's just a really important thing to name that. And it's still valuable to do it. And so having the mental story in your mind that what I have to say is valuable. I don't have to know everything in order to contribute. Some of the stories that I think women often have are, well, I'll just wait. I don't want to be XYZ. I don't want to be the diva. I don't want to be the harpy, the nag, those things, even though you've seen the thing that isn't done. You've seen the thing that is causing an issue. Being able to say, what I have to contribute is valuable, and it's better in the end for everybody if I say this now, because clear is kind. Whatever that story is you need to rewrite, that kind of bravery that starts inside is the way women have to start to move forward, because it's years of enculturation of other things that we're combating. And I think that when you start to do that over time, you build that bravery muscle. It won't necessarily feel comfortable in the moment, but over time, when you're like, oh yeah, when she says that, she's usually right. Or when she says those things, the outcome is better. You also build their muscle of trust for you.
Yeah, I want to come back to something you said, but Amanda, we'll go to you next if you had something to add there.
Yeah, I think it's establishing confidence and boundaries. I think that boundaries is something that's really important, and having strong lines of communication associated to those boundaries, right? So, for example, I try to show up incredibly kind, and that doesn't mean that I don't have clear established boundaries and I don't have, an intensity to me. It just means that I have boundaries associated to certain things in communication. And I think that's also an exercise of us as women leaders to be able to establish those boundaries, to be able to clearly communicate those boundaries, and to show up authentically as ourselves and feel very confident in doing so. That's the only thing that I would add. Because Jen, you nailed it right there.
Joanna?
So I think, when I kind of think about your question, it's hard to think just on the present versus thinking of the journey, because everybody that's the audience is in a different state, and how I show up today or what I do today, very different than what I did when I was younger, when I didn't have that many tools. And so what I will say is, first, I agree with both of you that there's already a perception in the way we communicate, right? And that sometimes feeds into this imposter syndrome that we feel. I'm not qualified. Why am I being invited? Do I have something to add? What is my value? So I think the first thing I will say to women is, if you feel that imposter syndrome, try to understand the why behind it. What is driving that? The second thing, knowing that in some cases, the way we present or what we're going to present may be received as, you're too passionate, and I've been told that in reviews before, you're too this. I think that what I've done throughout the years is that I write down in 2 columns, what are the facts and what are the emotions? And even when I'm talking to people, I try to address the emotions because we're people, but I try to present the facts, because then it's easier for anybody to follow the conversation. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't have to be passionate and that emotions are bad. But I think you have to understand in the setting you are when you want to influence, because otherwise you're going to feed into what people think as perceptions, and you're going to lose that opportunity. And I'll say one more thing. I think you have to find your tribe in the meetings where you are. What are the people that you can count on? And not just women. Because what I've noticed is that when I expand that tribe and I have men in those meetings that know me, that trust me, they back me up, and I'm a lot more comfortable sharing my experience. So I'll say that's what I will tell people, kind of depending on where they are in their journey.
Yeah, I think that is just incredible feedback, because, and I wonder, because it all ties back to something that Jen had said. I do also agree. In order to put your voice in the room, you do start building trust from others, which then some of the outcomes that Johanna just mentioned, you will actually have people that will support you and bring other issues up or bring things to light just because you had the courage to speak and put that into the room. But how do we get over those hurdles, and where we can actually encourage ourselves to take the first steps? I mean, I work with a lot of women that they have done this, but they then have there's some risks that they feel that are too great, and they won't actually be vulnerable, or they won't actually put their thought into the room and share this because of some of the negative risks that might come with that. So is there anything that you guys can speak on with that?
So can I share a funny story to describe this? So a couple weeks ago, I was on a sailboat in Portland, Maine. And I was on this trip with people, and I was actually steering, clicking the helm. That's what it's called. And I'm noticing up ahead, there's this enormous ship that we're sort of heading toward. And I'm like, in my mind, like, that looks like a tanker. And we're on this large-ish sailboat. And so I had to fight the story in my mind, because I struggle sometimes to say the thing, because I don't want to be the person that causes a fuss. I want to be easy to work with. I want to, so I don't always speak up, even though I am characterized by somebody who does. But the internal story of those imposter feelings comes up. Mm-hmm. And so I let things go that should have been addressed. But I'm like, that's a tanker. I really don't want to get hit by a tanker. So to the experienced sailor, I felt a little foolish saying, is that a tanker that we're headed toward? While I'm the one, steering the ship. And it turns out it was. And I am sure at some point she would have seen that and we would have adjusted the sails. However, it was a reminder to me that my internal story is the thing that I have to work on first.
Yeah.
So you have to weigh those risks. Our internal leadership narrative and mindset is what we have to change. And rewriting that story takes practice. It takes actual evidence. You can't just pretend that I'm going to be this person that you've never, ever done it in the past. But if you look in your past, you will find times where you've said the hard thing. It seemed scary and maybe negative at the moment, but it was worth it. Now, you'll find times where it was negative too, but when you're trying to rewrite the story, you have to choose the times where it went well and build on those. And so being able to say to her, hey, is that a tanker? I felt a little weird, but she's like, oh yeah, it is. And then she says to Mudge at the front, so we adjust the sails and everything's fine. Clearly I'm here. We didn't run into a tanker. But it can feel like that in a meeting. Like what is more dangerous, the outcome of not speaking up or the pain that is discomfort to maybe experience something negative for a short while before you say it. So fixing the story in your mind first is, I think, the way that we start to practice building trust with other people and trust with ourselves.
I agree. I think it 100% starts with trust in yourself. And that is something that's a learned behavior, in my opinion, and very much a learned skill in order to do that. Amanda, anything you would add to what Jen mentioned?
Yeah, so this is the former athlete in me. When I was a gymnast, so those of you that are tuning in that I've not had the opportunity to connect with, I was a high-level competitive gymnast. And when you think about bravery or overcoming fear, everything is scary when you haven't done it before. Some of these skills are incredibly scary. So I think that just taking one step forward. I think we think at big goals and we're like, these are big, massive things to overcome. And we don't realize how important just taking that first step can be. Right. And then I also think that having mentorship supporting you through some of those things is also helpful, especially when it's risky decisions. And I'll give you for example. I've got an incredible mentor that, as I continue to learn and build and grow within my own leadership journey, she's years and years and years ahead of me in having difficult conversations, doing difficult things in business. But she shows up very similar that how I want to show up. And when I have a situation that I'm just uncomfortable with, I'm fearful of, and I don't know how to move forward, the first phone call is to her. And it's because I have that trusted resource. And, it's really powerful when you surround yourself with those types of people that can help you overcome some of those challenges. And I think that when you're, especially a female leader, like we're all experiencing things, imposter syndrome, a lot of us are imposter syndrome, overcoming fear and challenges. And it's just a repetitive motion and putting one foot in front of the other to get one step better every single day. And it's that practice that Jen talked about, that it makes a world of difference. It's just, you have to take that first step. And then if you're concerned about the risk, maybe phoning a friend, calling a mentor to be able to help support you in that journey.
Joanna?
Yeah, I want to highlight that in the chat, a lot of people talk about authenticity. And so I want to address that because it's important. A lot of times people want to be like someone else because they ask questions in a way and they're respected and they lose themselves. And so find yourself, find your true person. I want to share something that happened to me in my journey that I think has helped me a lot. And one of the reasons sometimes I remember this, I was in a meeting with important people and people with a higher title than me. And I asked a question and I was shut down. Not only I felt shut down, I felt diminished. And so for the next few meetings, I knew that I wanted to ask questions. I actually didn't understand some of that information. And then I was going to go and execute on something that I didn't understand. So I was doing a lot more work. One of my mentors, as Amanda said, One time we were in a meeting and someone shut me down again, and it was embarrassing. And so when I follow up with this mentor, what she said to me is, in that conversation, was there a word or something that triggered the reaction of the other person? Was there something that you can pinpoint to? And I thought, wow, bingo, yes. And it was, but that also made me reflect. Was there something that people said that triggered something in me, and I stopped listening? And I'm afraid, and I don't have the courage anymore to ask questions. And that has helped me tremendously, because now when I'm thinking about going to meetings, instead of thinking this person, instead of labeling people for what has happened before, I better prepare my meeting to think, how am I going to ask my questions? How am I going to present? Mm-hmm. And I had to change my approach to come from a curiosity level. English is not my first language. So, and the process of being more concise, because we Latinos, we talk with our hands and use a lot of words. So trying to be more concise, sometimes my questions may not be very clear and may be offensive. And so I have to kind of think about that as well. So now I try to pose my questions from a curiosity. And I have seen also how people answer, because I'm also not assuming that what they're telling me is what I understand. And so instead of asking something so direct, I ask them to elaborate. And so I will say, kind of think about in those instances where you felt that you wanted to ask a question, but you were afraid. What was it that concerned you? What was it? Was it a previous experience? Was it a previous conversation with that person? And walk from there backwards to help you build that confidence in yourself.
I appreciate all of you sharing examples, because those are they're so different, but very much come back to the same point about exploring some things and understanding things with yourself. And when we talk about, this next question I want to go to is that how do you help people overcome that fear? And you talked a little bit about that, and I want us to dig in there. And for me, in a meeting format, understanding the communication styles. I mean, Jen, I know your Enneagram and things. I really do try to then adjust. I used to not do this, I'll be honest, but in the last 10 years, I have been very methodical about who's in the room, what are we trying to accomplish, what is the outcome I am looking for. So I actually have some intention going into that. If it's a discussion, it's a conference call. My goodness, the zillion Zoom calls you're on right now. If you can get in person, that's a blessing, because you get more energy in the room with that. And so when you are working hybrid, remote, and all of these filters that are now changing our language, so to speak, then I think you've got to give more thought to that. But if I can get really intentional about what I want to do, and Johanna, yes, coming from a place of curiosity, so I'm not putting people on the defensive in the way that I'm asking the question, because at the end of the day, I just want the best result and the best answer and the best outcome. But everyone, it's a trust thing, because not everybody in the room trusts everyone either, and you get some of those responses. So let's talk about if there is something that you do in which you can apply a principle or a framework, or so I just shared mine of what I'm going to do if I'm working with someone, working with a team or a group. But is there anything that you do specifically to help overcome negative perception, to help you be able to challenge things as you would like to do, be able to speak in a room where you may not have been comfortable to do that before? Yeah, go ahead, Amanda, please.
So I'll jump in here because I used to do this very terribly, and I'm getting a lot better. But it's making sure to set the meeting appropriately and say, look, we are going to have a difficult decision. We may be talking about things that are a little bit challenging. We are a team. We're trying to get from point A to point B. And I think being very clear that we can have difficult conversations and still be kind and still show up. The goal is to move this thing from point A to point B. And I'm talking more around project right now, where like meeting. But it's clarity. It's being very clear, setting expectations, and making sure to do that on the front end. So that begins with me. I have to get very clear before I step into that meeting or whatever it may be. So I think, Michelle, you hit the nail on the head there about, I've got to do the tough work of like trying to figure out what's the intention, what are we trying to accomplish, what are the steps, is this going to be a difficult decision, or difficult conversation going into that, and setting that so that we can come at it from a perspective of ideas and innovation and problem solving versus pointing the finger and saying, creating some level of complexity that doesn't need to be there. And so that's something just tactically that I've been trying to incorporate moving forward, is because when emotions get high, they get high, right? But sometimes emotions can be a great thing if funneled in the right direction. And so making sure as the leader that you're setting up that experience, that meeting, whatever it may be, in the right way. It's all about framing and making sure that everybody understands the intent and where people are coming from, so that it can be more around innovation and idea sharing.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah, Jen, go ahead.
So 2 weeks ago, my team and I'm in the middle of a rebranding process. So if you've ever done that as either a solopreneur or experienced that, where you have a big project where you still have to keep doing your work while changing the actual work that you're doing, that's what's happening. And so we had this very frustrating meeting that kind of blindsided everybody. All of us were surprised that this was a frustrating meeting. And because normally, like Amanda, I'm pretty prepared. Here's what we're doing. And it just surprised everybody. And I had to come back to the framework that I use for healthy, effective communication. So, and I call it clean, like keeping communication clean. And first of all, it's clarity, just what Amanda said. You have to be clear on what you're looking for, what you want. And clear is, Brene Brown says clear is kind. But the other thing that she says that I love is to paint done. Sometimes we sketch done. We're like, oh yeah, they kind of get what I mean. We need to paint that picture. And then L is listen with curiosity. That listening with curiosity is such a powerful tool, not waiting for our turn to talk, not making sure they got what we said, like, what am I having for lunch? Is it my day for carpool? Like, I know all those things are going through our minds, but listening with curiosity. And sometimes the way around that is literally to say to yourself, I wonder, or I'm curious about. Turn an assumption into a question. And so I'm kind of wondering about this. Now, say it with kindness, as Amanda said. It's not like you just like, I'm kind of wondering, and use your tone, but that's the idea. So you're listening with curiosity. And then that emotional regulation piece. Emotions will always be there. They are a key part of decision making. But what we are always afraid of with emotions is that they're going to run away like a tsunami. And what we want them to be is a canal. We still need to express them, but they're taking us somewhere, giving us some information and taking us somewhere we want to go. We just get to dig the canal rather than them just going everywhere. So paying attention to the emotions in the room, your own emotions, and practicing that emotional regulation. And then using a story to illustrate your point, absorbing stories. If you're giving a piece of data, if you're trying to paint done, use a story. So I'm on Marco Polo with my team member saying, I know this is frustrating. We're going to get through this. I'm telling her what I'm envisioning, but I'm using also these emotional pieces. And I'm saying, here's what I'm hoping to have happen. Here's what we've done before. So I'm using a story from an experience that we had together that said, oh yeah, we've done this before. I've done it before. I can do it again. That's what I say all the time. So like, if we've done it before, it's part of self-efficacy says I can do this again. So I'm using a story to illustrate that to my team. And then the last one is nonverbal alignment. So when you are saying words, my Italian self, Joanna, I identify. Sometimes my face doesn't have a mute button, and I need to manage this situation better. And so I've had to practice what I my confused face looks very angry. And so one, I've had to say it out loud, like, hey, I'm just confused. I'm not actually angry. And I've had to practice that nonverbal alignment, that I'm actually interested, but they're perceiving this as confused. So I need my body language to feel open, because that's what I want to communicate. And that's how I actually feel. And so I'm directing my body in the way I want it to go. So in this really difficult team situation, we had to have a distributed conversation because we had to shut the Zoom off. Everybody was traveling. So we're on Marco Polo, we're texting. These are not the best communication forms to finish a conversation, but I kept coming back to the clean framework, and it works even in this distributed conversation. So we figured out what the problem was. We started to move forward. Everybody felt whole and clear at the end. And it's another story in our bucket of we can do hard things together, even when it's difficult.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. I haven't heard that acronym before, so
that's because it's mine.
Joanna?
Oh, there's a lot of things, but I think I will say, it's difficult to lead anyone to something that you don't believe in. Yeah. So I think you have to always start with yourself. And I remember reading a book. It's a very simple, it's called Leading Without a Title by Robin Sharma. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. And there is a phrase there that says aligning your video with your audio. And so if you don't do that, I think it's really hard to try to send a message to anyone. But in the setting that you talk about, I think it's always important to understand your audience. And so at my company, we do something called emergenetics. So it kind of, which is great at the workplace, because you have that visual of everyone and what's their preference and their thinking, and also how they show up. And so I'm a high conceptual, high analytical person. So my brain is always going crazy because there's always a better idea, but I also want proof for the numbers. And so just having those tools, if you have any tools that you can use to prepare for that meeting, to prepare for that message, I think it's so crucial and important, because then you're thinking about the audience. And then I think when you want people to do something, I agree with the clarity of the message. I think all of that was a spot on. I will offer that something that really helped me was the golden circle, which has 3 components: the why, the how, and the what. And I think many times we are so eager to deliver a message that we talk about the what a lot, but we don't talk about the why. And the why is super crucial because it helps people understand the reason behind that movement. And remember, as leaders, sometimes we have the higher view, or people don't have it. So we're helping connect the dots for them and help them understand what is that we want them to do and why. And I agree with you, Jen. I mean, my facial expression, the way that I speak, sometimes I think confuses people. So understanding what you want them to do. And a lot of things, I think this is very simple, but if we just build relationships with people, even when you make a mistake in the way you are delivering the message, they're going to give you grace because they know you and they understand where you're coming from. So, in anything we do, really spending the time to build a relationship with those individuals, whether they're colleagues, higher ups, employees that we have, is going to help us also understand what is that we're trying to deliver to them. But I think the why, the how, and the what, it is crucially. Now, I want to share something that went wrong. And I think in the spirit of wanting to collaborate with everybody, sometimes the biggest mistake that I see is that we come in and we tell people we want their feedback in something when the decision has already been made. Oof. And it's absolutely awful. So I agree with Jen and Amanda, the clarity of the message. Am I wanting them to help me with feedback on how we're going to execute? That is very different than asking them for feedback on something that we had to make a decision, because sometimes you have to make decisions and you cannot involve everybody. So I think I will say that the golden circle, understanding that piece, the clarity of the message, and thinking of your audience. What do you want them to do?
Yeah, I think those are just fantastic frameworks, because it actually should allow people to understand more about where you're coming from as well, because everybody in that room has interest in it going successfully. And I will admit I've been blind to what other people might need. And I was very focused on what I needed to get done. And that always took the priority. Last 10 years, I've been recovering from that. And I no longer do that. And it's very much more collaborative, but really understanding who your stakeholders are, who's going to be really important in that process and what is important to them so that you can focus and come with a more collaborative spirit, curiosity, mindset, and be able to be actually, authentic. There's been lots of notes in the chats about that. It allows you to be truly authentic because you are coming from a place that you completely understand for yourself and what you're trying to get done. So self-advocacy to me is like one of the most important things that you can learn how to do for yourself. And then also for others to create that perception, because all of us as leaders, we're always not in the same rooms. Our names get mentioned in rooms that we're not in. Perceptions of us get created by people that don't understand what we're about or what we're trying to do. And so this to me is like one of the most important skills of a leader, is to figure out how to self-advocate. So could we just unpack that a little bit from your perspective, what that is? Are you getting tense, Joanna?
I am.
What that is, and because I think that's a journey that you always stay on, and you can get very discouraged if you do not have this as a way to offset when you're shut down, when you took a risk and maybe it didn't turn out like you wanted to, when it just didn't go to plan. You've got to have this and have your ability to frame those conversations with other people that actually determine your future as well, right? Within the organization or with business partners, because you have other people that are taking in this information. So you've always got to be doing this. So I'm going to be quiet now, but can we talk about this and let's unpack what it is and what do you do to ensure you're advocating for yourself?
I can start. Oh, go ahead.
All right. No, go right ahead. She took a deep breath. She should be ready.
Yeah. I think again it's myself at 18 versus now 43, very different. I moved from Ecuador when I was 18. I was 2 weeks in Illinois when I joined the Army. And so I had to find my voice. I didn't speak the language, and I was letting other people tell my story way too many times because in a way I wasn't fluent. I couldn't tell my story. And then with imposter syndrome, but I'll give you some examples. And again, I think it's something that is not always simple, but it's a muscle that you have to work. And so for me, it started by advocating for others. I remember being in meetings, and this is throughout my career, where I have shared an example and it was brushed off. But then, unfortunately, typically the other genders shared the same thing and it was praise. And it used to bother me. I used to leave that room so upset, but I never took action. I never said anything because I didn't want to feed into the perception of the emotions again, right? Trying to get credit for credit that I deserve, but I didn't know how to do it. And so what I started doing is I started doing some research in how I could do it. And I still didn't feel right to do it for myself, but I started doing it for others. And for me, what I typically needed was language. How do I position that? What are some phrases that can help me? And so what I started doing is and I'm going to give fictitious name to these people, but let's say Ana and Miguel. Ana shares something, again, kind of brushed off. And then Miguel, 10 minutes later, shares something. And I remember the first time, and I said something like, "That is great, Miguel. Can you elaborate on how is that different than what Ana said?" So I wasn't attacking Miguel. I wasn't attacking anybody, but I was being very clear and very courageous to point out that the same thing had been said before. And it was interesting how the dynamic changed. And what I noticed in those settings is that I had many times males that were coming in and saying, "Oh, that is great. I think Joanna mentioned that before." and you're influencing the culture because you were brave enough to point something that I have to say, somebody is not only always a conscious decision. I think it's an unconscious bias that we face sometimes in the workplace. And then something happened to me when I had to advocate for myself. And I think this, a lot of women can relate. I got a promotion. I was stopped in the shoulder for a promotion. I didn't even apply. I felt great. I don't know that everybody did feel the same. And then when I was able to see my employees and I had to do the reviews, one of my employees who had a quarter of the amount of work that I did with the promotion was making more than I did. Significantly more than I did. And that hurt. I was upset. My husband was furious. And then I had to do what I mentioned before, that chart. And I thought, what are my emotions and what are the facts? And how do I present this? So I went to my boss at that time. And after a review, she asked me if I had any feedback. And I said, okay. I was about to not say anything, but I had to. And so I shared that I had a chance to see that. And I said, what the money is significant is not all about the money, because if it was about the money, I could be going somewhere else. But it's the principle that you and the company trusted me with higher responsibilities, and I'm not being compensated for the responsibilities that I have. And so the other piece I share, and I kind of had to empathize with my emotions. I said, the other piece to this is that I felt like nobody cared. Like everybody that was higher than me was going to be able to see that. So you all knew it and you felt that it was okay. And that really bothered me. I felt diminished and I said, and honestly, people that report to me, I think they're thinking that I'm making a lot more money and they're feeling like they were not selected for this opportunity. And I remember that after that conversation, I felt like 30 pounds were lifted. And I said to this person, and I know it's not just you, and I hope that you're also advocating for yourself, because I had a feeling that that person also may be making less money than others. That really changed my perspective. And the one thing I will say, advocating for yourself is not fighting with somebody. Advocacy, being courageous, is not creating fights. It's really finding, again, if you think about, empathize with your emotions, but address the facts. Because when you address the facts, there's really nothing to fight about. It didn't happen overnight for me, but I think 2 months passed by and there was a reevaluation. And I thought the worst thing that they can say is no, and I move on. And because of that, I have found a way to advocate for myself many times. And I will close with saying, I think that in order to do that, there has to be a place where you can feel vulnerable, because you're going to make mistakes and you're not always going to get the yeses. So on the mistakes you make as well, because that is important. But I'll say that, Michelle, that helped me learn how to advocate. I had to work the muscle.
I'm proud of you for taking that approach and doing that. A lot of people wouldn't do that. And that's a risk, right? That's a very vulnerable place to be. But your leader as well had created some safety net for you where you felt like, be honest. That's a very important part of what we should also be doing, so that someone else can come in and be just as authentic and be able to model the things that we're expecting ourselves to do. That's when you are somewhat winning, right? When you're creating an environment and you see these behaviors modeled by people that you lead, things that you really admire. That's when you know, guys, that when things are moving in the right direction, when that's starting to happen. That's a great story. Amanda?
So I'm going to go back to gymnastics, because I think that this is a great visual. And if you're watching the Olympics, you can kind of appreciate this, right? So you've got girls that are competing for those top tier spots to compete in the Olympics. And what you're seeing is individual leaders that are lifting each other up, cheering for each other, supporting one another, even in an incredibly, incredibly difficult situation, right? Everybody is better when they lift everybody up. I wholeheartedly believe that. So when it comes to advocacy, I see it as a solopreneur from a digital perspective, because I think a lot of business owners are leveraging digital ecosystems to generate influence. And there's a lot of bravery and courage that has to go into that. And there's also a lot of advocacy that has to happen with other people. So supporting other people from a digital perspective, making sure. I'm a super hype girl when it comes to applying for, opportunities for people, trying to promote other people's stuff. Like, I think that that's really powerful. It goes back to that gymnastics situation where I can be in a highly competitive environment, but I can still advocate and support my community. That starts with me. It starts with me showing up in that way. And then in turn, people do that for me. I also have gotten into the habit of, when it comes to advocating for myself, I ask for opportunities. Yeah. I reach out to people that are inspiring me and see about potentially learning from them. So like, I am constantly figuring out ways to like, how can I advocate for other people? Whether it's as simple as leaving a Google review for their business, whether it's, getting them an opportunity through a connection or a relationship, maybe making connections for them. It's all about how can I take my platform to help elevate everybody in my ecosystem. And I see it from a digital perspective because that's the space that I'm in, right? But it's how can I, as a leader, support my community, even if in competition, like we can be in wildly competitive environments and still lift each other up. And I think that that's a female superpower as well. I think of all of my, strong female leaders, and we're all cheering each other on and supporting one another. But to Joanna, to your point, it starts with me. It starts with me showing up in that capacity. And then other people just do it for me as well. And we all lift each other up and cheer each other on. I mean, reality is business is hard. Right? Why not try to support one another and find a little bit of joy in it?
Thank you for that. Jen?
I think, so many great things that Joanna and Amanda have added. And I think just to build on that, I have one thing that maybe not controversial, but contradicts something that we keep saying today. Mm-hmm. I really feel passionate about reframing the idea of imposter syndrome to imposter feelings. Ooh. Because an imposter syndrome puts it in pathology, and it says there's something wrong with you because you have experienced moments of self-doubt. You are not human if you don't experience moments of self-doubt. Yes, I, as a coach and a consultant, am always trying to help people move towards self-trust. But the reality is that's part of the work because that's part of being human. So first of all, just recognizing that just because you experience self-doubt and that you have imposter feelings doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. So putting that into a certain perspective, I always find is really, really helpful. And then the other component that I work with clients around in my leadership lab, when I'm working inside organizations at my Joyosity retreat, it's always a component of really understanding your values. Yeah. Yes, you have to understand your personality. As a personality expert, yes, I believe that. You have to understand that. You have to have mindset. But if you don't know your values, your decision-making will be less clear. Your communication will be less clear. Your emotional regulation will be all over the place because you won't recognize that someone has stepped on your value because you didn't know that you had it. Because we have values. And when I say clarifying your values, it's not just kind of what do I think about this? Your values are your chosen lens to live your life. And so clarifying them by naming them, giving them your own definitions. Like I was reading you part of my definition of bravery. Like the second half of that definition is a strength of spirit that moves to action. So we're doing something with it. That's my definition. And so it's not, it's like, this ain't Webster. It's not Webster's definition. It's Jen's definition. It's Joanna's definition. It's who you are. And then a lot of people stop there, or they put them up on a wall, and you're like, that's great. There are my values. Aren't they beautiful? And mine are on the wall over there. But you have to put them into an operating system. And so that's one of my favorite things to help clients through, is really put them into an operating system. And before you get there, before you get to values, it can be like, oh my gosh, I have this page of literally 300 words. I don't know where to start. So I often take people through a Joyosity Explorer map that looks at, what are the things that I enjoy? What are my past successes? What are the things that drain me? What are the things that steal my joy? If you can't be like, okay, my values are family and faith and fun, like if you're just lost in this world of words, sometimes you have to start there. And so when you know what brings you joy, when you know what gives you life, when you know what's draining you, then you can label your values, give them definitions, and put them into an operating system. So Joanna's T chart of what are my emotions and what are the facts, I would also add to that, what do I want to do? How do I feel? What do I think? What do I want to do? Those are important questions to ask yourself. And they're really hard to answer and be brave if you don't know what you value, because then it leads to confusion. So I love the brilliance of what Amanda and Joanna have said. And I just want to add that you've got to know you. You can't lead anyone else until you lead yourself. And so when you're feeling that, I got to speak up, I got to be brave, this is scary. Like, I would love to, like, the coach in me wants to dig into Joanna's story and be like, what was the emotion and what was the value that said it was worth me advocating for myself? Because there's a value there that gave you the strength of spirit to move to action, that then laid a path for all these other people. Like, that's so powerful. And I bet Amanda has a deep value somewhere of like community or connection or something that says, I want to be the hype girl for these people. And it's not pie. There's enough room for everybody, even in intense competition. So your values create a deeper grounding within us that isn't just mental assent. Yeah, I believe that thing. It becomes more aligned with you emotionally, spiritually, physically, and mentally.
100%. What a fantastic ad on that, Jen. And it enables people to actually truly operate with the right intention, and their communication, everything follows that. Thank you for pulling that together. That was incredible.
Michelle,
yes.
I can add something very quickly, because I learned this in my last few years. I think when it comes to advocacy and helping others find a voice, sometimes we think that everybody's voice is the same. And so there are people that don't like to speak in public, but they have a lot to add. So now with technology, adding the chat, giving people an opportunity to prepare ahead. And so I would just offer that, especially now that we recognize neurodiversity, is extremely important, that we create other channels for other people to also share and advocate for that for others.
No, that's a great ad. Thank you for that.
So good.
So let's do final thoughts. What would you like to leave our audience with on this topic? Amanda, we'll go to you first.
I would just say, like, do the deep work around what we're all talking about, right? Is like identifying core values. What's important to you? What is your mission statement? Like, we as individuals have to figure all of those components out to better identify how are we going to show up as leaders. Like, Jen's leadership style is probably very different than mine, and so is Joanna's, and so is Michelle's. Like, that's the beauty of all of this. Like, if we can do the deep work on ourselves as leaders and identify what that leadership term means to each of us, we can show up better. We can be better advocates. We can help educate and support each other a little bit better. And then it's also asking the questions, right? Like, we can do the deep work on ourselves, but then I believe we have to lead with curiosity and ask better questions. That allows other people to step in and also show up in their own leadership space. So that's what I would leave with people, is it's so critical to figure out and find your voice, figure out what's authentic to you and how you want to show up. And then you've got to cut out all the noise and continue to lead and show up authentically as who you are. And I think when you go through that step, it's incredibly powerful. There's a million things I could leave you guys with, but I think that to get people moving in that direction, the biggest piece is to just do that deep work as individuals and as leaders.
And I'll just add one thing that on that, because there's a lot of people watching you too, your
Yeah.
team, other leaders. And so sometimes if you can't maybe find enough courage to do that, then maybe you can do that because you're setting the right example for other people and you're modeling things that are important to you, even if it has to show up. That's how I used to force myself to get in the room, because I knew I had other people relying on me and watching me, and I needed to take a first step and get this message out there, that just to get you started. Those are great points, Amanda. Jen?
Oh, I know. There's so many things I would love to just close people with. I think to kind of build on what Amanda said is that success isn't a solo sport. Leadership is absolutely a team sport. It is not something we endeavor alone. I was a swimmer. So as a competitive swimmer, I am also watching the Olympics deeply right now. And it seems so often that people are like, oh, that's an individual sport. That's an individual sport. But you can't win a swim meet without everybody. Some people have to take first, some people have to take second, some people have to take third. And you actually win the meet if all of your people take second and third and nobody else wins first. And that takes teamwork to understand. Of course, you want to win your race, but racing the best that you've got and your individual knowledge of yourself, doing the deep work of understanding yourself, you will be more effective. And then you will be a better addition to the team. So you've got these people who are looking behind you, but you're aware that they're valuable to bring with you. And so are you. Like, you are worth it too. And you are worthy of owning your voice. You are worthy of joy, and you are worthy of the space that you take up. And I think we forget that because we have to pretend that like we're somebody else. But you knowing who you are, doing that deep work, knowing that you're worthy, that makes you an incredibly contagious leader that brings other authentic leaders with you.
Great ad. Great ad. Johanna?
Build relationships, get to know people, understand your why, but also understand other people's whys. Because when you do, it helps you understand why people are doing what they're doing, because it could be experience, it could be many different things. When you're thinking about advocating for yourself or others, I'll share two phrases that I used to think, Michelle, you heard me before. I used to say since I was a young manager, every day is an interview.
Yes.
Every single day. You're interviewing with your peers to lead them. You're interviewing with clients. You're interviewing with friends. And you're showcasing who you are, whether they can trust you or not. So don't forget that advocacy doesn't have to be this big meeting or like me advocating for myself for a raise. Advocacy happens in a small little pieces. And if you want to advocate for yourself, no matter where you are in the journey, in order for people to knock on your door, you got to build the door. Mm-hmm. Think about what it takes for you to build that door. It goes with what Jen and Amanda said. Learning, being authentic, preparing yourself for those meetings. And so I will say that don't forget every day is an interview, and don't start tomorrow, start today. Building the door so people can knock on your door and giving you those opportunities, because that's what happened to me. And today I get the joy to lead the Hispanic Latino strategy for the bank, which is my dream job. But that job started when I started with the company 7 years ago, with the little things that I did from a community perspective, from projects that didn't exist. I raised my hand. I built that door. And again, thank you, Michelle, Amanda, and Jen. This has been a great conversation.
No, thank you guys as well. And the only thing I would leave is just phenomenal. I've got pages and pages of notes here. But I just want to make sure, Jen talked about knowing your value. I think you also have to understand what your standards are. Mm-hmm. I believe everybody has to have a standard of what you hold yourself accountable for, what you'd like to see in others, what you need in others, because your support network grows from that and leaning into that. And you can find a sense of belonging in those steps, because you have to build trust first and foremost with yourself in order to take these steps and take this action. So this has been a phenomenal conversation, ladies. Thank you very much. And thank you guys for joining us.
Thanks for having us.